The Las Vegas Raiders have just handed the Denver Broncos some incredible news. The Raiders are boldly stepping into the same pattern the Broncos have followed for years, one that has led to disaster after disaster. And here's the thing, it's all because the Raiders are repeating a mistake they should have learned from. Trying to defy logic and hoping for different results will only backfire. And while they may be optimistic, this move is bound to hurt them in the long run. But let's break this down. The trade that happened on Friday night sent shockwaves through the league, especially when it was revealed that Geno Smith was traded to the Raiders for a third-round pick. Raiders fans might be celebrating, thinking they've just secured their next MVP, but let's be clear. No elite quarterback in NFL history has ever been traded for just a third-round pick. It's a huge gamble, and it's one that will almost certainly fail. This actually plays into the hands of the Broncos, who now get a chance to see how Seattle's gamble with Russell Wilson turned out. Seattle's plan to rebuild by trading Wilson clearly didn't work. They gave up a star quarterback hoping it would bring them success, but instead, they've been left with an incomplete roster and a reset button they have to hit once again. The trade wasn't a win for Seattle, and it's clear they didn't get the playoff success they had hoped for. Let's not forget about how Russell Wilson must be feeling. Imagine seeing his name on the market now for essentially nothing. No trade capital needed, just his salary. And the Broncos are still paying a large chunk of that. It's a reminder of how big of a shift has happened and how much things have changed since that trade went down. The Raiders might be setting themselves up for a major lesson, and for the Broncos, this could very well be the start of something much better. The Raiders are making a huge gamble, trading away draft capital to acquire Geno Smith, and on top of that, they're paying him a ridiculous salary. It's a move that only reinforces what Sean Payton was saying about Russell Wilson and the whole situation in Denver. A lot of people criticize Payton for moving on from Wilson too quickly, but now it's clear that Payton was right all along. If anyone knows what Russell Wilson is truly capable of, it's Pete Carroll, and even he wasn't willing to let Wilson play for basically nothing in Vegas. Let's dive into the Geno Smith trade and what it really means. First off, it's important to note that the Raiders are giving up a third-round pick, and let's be honest, no top-tier quarterback in NFL history has ever been traded for such a low pick. We've seen this play out time and time again, where teams think they can turn around a quarterback that didn't quite pan out elsewhere. Think Case Keenum. He had some solid games for the Vikings, but when the Vikings let him go, it was clear he wasn't the guy. Same story with Joe Flacco, Teddy Bridgewater, Mark Sanchez, and even Russell Wilson. When a team moves on from a player, especially a quarterback, they know something the rest of us don't. After working with him for years, they've seen everything he's got. The Raiders, however, are ignoring this reality. Not only are they giving up a valuable third-round pick, which they got from trading Davante Adams to the Jets, but they're also about to hand Smith a massive contract. Reports say that Geno Smith is set to sign a deal worth $40 to $45 million per year. For comparison, the Russell Wilson deal will look like pocket change if this trade goes through. A 3-year, $45 million contract for Geno Smith? That's not going to age well, especially considering how much cap space the Raiders had coming into the offseason. The Raiders may be setting themselves up for a tough road ahead. They're betting big on Geno Smith, but history suggests this is a move that might not pay off. The Raiders are locking themselves into a situation where they'll have a ton of money tied up in aging players, much like the Kansas City Chiefs have done in recent years. This is a perfect scenario for the Broncos, as they get to watch the Raiders make a move that could seriously backfire in the long run. It's a classic case of teams investing heavily in veterans who might not have much left in the tank, and it's a trend that rarely works out in the NFL. Mike Carolini over at Mic'd Up put together an eye-opening comparison between Geno Smith and rookie quarterback Bo Nix. In a head-to-head breakdown, Nix, who's never played a single game with NFL-level talent, actually outperformed Geno Smith in key areas. And yet the Raiders are ready to hand Geno Smith a contract worth $40 to $45 million per year and make him the face of their franchise. This is a huge mistake. If a rookie quarterback who had minimal experience can outperform Smith, how is that a solid long-term solution? Looking at their stats side by side, it's clear that while Smith may have had a higher completion percentage, Nix had to deal with several drops from his receivers. Meanwhile, Smith played with a top-tier receiver like DK Metcalf and had a solid supporting cast in Tyler Lockett and Kenneth Walker in the backfield. Nix doesn't have the luxury of such a supporting cast, and yet he still put up impressive numbers. It gets even more alarming when you look at their passing yards, passing touchdowns, interception rate, and overall performance. Nix had more touchdowns, fewer interceptions, a higher passer rating, a better QBR, and more wins, all as a rookie. Yet the Raiders are choosing to hitch their future to Geno Smith, someone who clearly isn't performing at the same level as up-and-coming quarterbacks like Nix. Other NFL quarterbacks like Chase Daniel have already pointed out how bizarre it is that the Raiders are offering such a hefty deal to Geno Smith. If Smith is worth $45 million a year, what's a true starting quarterback like Brock Purdy going to demand? The Raiders are making a critical mistake, and it could send them into a downward spiral. I was already worried about the Raiders heading into the offseason, especially after rumors of Matthew Stafford potentially landing there. This latest move only makes things look worse for their future. I'm feeling great about where things are headed for the Broncos, especially when I look at the Raiders' situation. It's hard to ignore that Geno Smith isn't exactly a game changer. One of the key reasons he was let go by Seattle was his struggles, particularly in the red zone, where he led the league in interceptions last season. That alone proves he's not a winning quarterback, and I feel confident this move will blow up in the Raiders' face. This is a huge win for the Broncos and honestly for the entire AFC West. The Raiders may be in a deep hole here, but if they're planning to use Geno Smith as a bridge quarterback while still eyeing a potential star like Shedder Sanders with the 6th overall pick, then they might have a smarter long-term plan. Think of it like the Atlanta Falcons with Kirk Cousins. Sure, they whiffed on Cousins and it didn't work out, but they were able to pivot quickly and had Michael Penix Jr. waiting in the wings. If the Raiders play it smart like that, I'll feel a bit less optimistic. But as of now, this is shaping up to be a great start to the offseason for the Broncos. Shifting gears, there's some exciting news from the Broncos camp that could add a wild new dimension to the team. Lil Jordan Humphrey, a player who hasn't been in the spotlight much lately, is making waves. With Tim Patrick and Samaje Perine being cut, there's been some talk about Humphrey's potential. Sean Payton has always valued him for his excellent blocking and team-first mentality. While he's not your typical wide receiver, Humphrey's bulked up during the offseason, and there are whispers he could transition into a tight end role next year. If this happens, it could be a game changer. We've already seen what Humphrey can do with the ball in space, and if he adds muscle and becomes a tight end, he could be a wild card. What's even more interesting is that this idea wasn't just something coming from the Broncos' coaches. It was something YouTubers and fans were suggesting last season. A lot of people were mocked for saying he should add weight and make the switch, but now it looks like that might be exactly what happens. It's a cool reminder that sometimes outside-the-box ideas can end up being spot on. It's amazing how often people on Twitter seem to predict the future before it even happens. Let's just hope this trend continues with the Raiders move. Honestly, they've just handed us a huge gift to start the weekend, and I couldn't be more excited. Broncos country, we've got so much to look forward to. It's shaping up to be a great time ahead. Let's go.